I'm trying to give you an overview of all the ranges of reparations that are possible. When I look through the different case studies, again, you can see that some maximise return and some minimise return. In Bosnia, Kosovo and Iraq, there's certainly a case of maximising, trying to get people to go back to the areas to reverse the ethnic cleansing that had taken place. And in others, there's an acceptance that the population shifts were too great, and also there was the balance of power had not shifted so sufficiently, like in Guatemala, where the reversal of ethnic cleansing could take place. So the program that was agreed upon did not quite allow the full restitution or return. And then there's the form that I discussed in South Africa and post-communist Europe, where social and economic criteria also play a big part in deciding the nature of the reparations. Just to sort of pull in a number of other issues which don't quite fit into these three categories, just in a form of just making me think a little bit about 2 minutes? Yeah. Good. This is my second last slide. Secondary occupation, as I mentioned before, is a major issue. The longer the longer people have been in a property as secondary occupants, people who've occupied a refugee property for a long time, the longer they're there, the more their rights accumulate. It's not as if refugee rights go down and secondary occupant rights go up. Refugee rights maybe stay the same, but secondary occupant rights also go up. So it makes it very complex the longer time has elapsed. What is the impact of time? Is there a cut-off point? At what point do you say it's too late to change it? Too a longer period of time has elapsed for there to be a radical change? In law, as far as I understand, time doesn't play a part in this. That the refugee rights do not diminish over time, but other rights do come into play at the same time. So it's not as if your rights are lost as a refugee. It just that means that your rights become one of other rights which then start to emerge. What happens to rights of people who have no children? What happens to them? Does it go back to the state? That's another big issue. To whom does those rights go to? And how much role does the refugees have in deciding the whole package deal? And this is a big issue which still needs a lot more work on. What sort of mechanisms can there be in introducing a very strong refugee voice in determining these rights? Just to conclude then, in terms of the good news and the bad news, I think you can now guess what some of the good news and the bad news is. I think I'll start with the bad news because I want to get it out of the way. The bad news is that this full restitution in kind, the return to your property in the way that it was as you wanted it, when it's left, does take place in very few cases. It's not as often as you might expect or wish. And the prospects of that does diminish over time. Not because your rights diminish, but because the practicalities, the difficulties increase. And the rights of secondary occupants, some start to erode and to dilute the possibility of reoccupying or having restitution for your particular property. Now, in the Palestinian case, the claim for restitution is not necessarily, it's not against the individuals. It's not against the individual Israelis who have moved into various villages and homes. It is actually against the state which has allowed that, which has another dynamic there, which I think I need to do some more work on and seeing how that dynamic operates in other case studies. And secondly, this whole issue that I don't know if you know the work of Salman Abu-Sitter, who has produced some figures which show that 70% of refugee homes are still vacant. What does that mean in terms of secondary occupation and rights of restitution? That needs a little bit more research. But in general, looking at the case studies that I've looked at, full restitution, full return to the property only occurs in a small number of cases. The good news is that these kinds of claims are standard. It's not unusual. It's not as if the Palestinians are asking for anything unusual whatsoever. It's as if they're asking for more or less what other refugees are asking across the board. It's accepted practice to come to some sort of agreement about the return of property in some form. And the good news is that there are many imaginative ways to come to find, being thought about, being devised to get around the difficulties. There's various exchanges of properties, bonds, vouchers, development and assistance. There's ways in which people are trying to overcome the problem of what do you do with secondary occupation or with the demolition of former homes. And I suppose the other piece of good news is that however long-standing your refugee position is, your situation is, however long ago the dispossession took place, it's still being dealt with. In the South African case, you still can make claims for property if you lost your property after 1913. That's 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they're still accepting claims for loss of property for over 100 years. So there's plenty of time in some respects. And when you look at some of the cases of the Native American Indians, the Sioux Indians, who were dispossessed from the Black Hills of Dakota, they were offered billions of dollars in 1990, and they refused it because they still want to return to their homes rather than to receive compensation. So there's many cases where this is the length of time does not actually play an overriding role. I think I'll stop here and take questions later. Thank you.